Welcome to Wave of the Day by Smallest.ai. This is the third episode, and I'm your host, Emily, joined by my brilliant co-host, Armin. Today, we're diving deep into something fascinating: long short-term memory RNN, or LSTMs. Armin, I know you've been excited about this topic.
Absolutely, Emily. You know what's fascinating about LSTMs? They're like the memory champions of the artificial intelligence world. Imagine having a friend who can remember both what you said 5 minutes ago and what you said last week. That's basically what LSTMs do, but with data.
Wait, that's actually a great analogy. But before we dive too deep, maybe we should explain what these LSTMs are part of. I mean, where do they fit in the bigger picture of machine learning?
Good point. So LSTMs are actually a type of recurrent neural network RNN, which falls under the deep learning umbrella in machine learning. Think of it like a family tree. If machine learning is the grandparent, deep learning is the parent, and RNN are like the siblings of other neural networks. LSTMs are basically the really smart cousin who's really good at remembering things.
Love the family analogy. But what makes them so special? Why do we need this smart cousin when we have other neural networks?
You know how sometimes when you're trying to remember something from way back, it gets kind of fuzzy. Regular neural networks have the same problem. It's called the vanishing gradient problem. LSTMs were specifically designed to solve this. They have this clever internal system of gates that help them decide what to remember and what to forget.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you break down these gates for our listeners? I'm imagining actual gates opening and closing in my head right now.
Well, you're not far off. There are three main gates: the forget gate, input gate, and output gate. Let me give you a fun example. Imagine you're watching a movie with two characters, Alice and Bob. The LSTM is like a super smart movie viewer who can keep track of both characters even when they're not on screen.
Oh, I love this. So if Bob disappears for half an hour, the LSTM doesn't forget about him.
Exactly. The forget gate decides what's not important anymore, like the color of Bob's coffee cup. The input gate decides what new information to save, like important plot points. And the output gate decides what information is relevant for making predictions about what might happen next.
This is fascinating. And I know our listeners might be wondering, where do we actually use these smart memory networks in real life?
Oh, they're everywhere. One really cool application is in solar power production forecasting. There was this study where they used LSTMs to predict how much power solar plants would generate, and they actually outperformed traditional physical models.
Wait, seriously? Do you have any numbers on that? Our data-loving listeners would appreciate some concrete results.
Actually, yes. The LSTM model achieved an average root mean squared error of 0.0724, while the traditional physical model scored 1,086. In simpler terms, the LSTM was significantly more accurate at predicting power generation.
That's impressive. But you know what I'm curious about? Are LSTMs always the best choice? What about those traditional statistical methods we hear about, like ARIMA?
That's actually a great question, and it's not as straightforward as you might think. It's kind of like choosing between a Swiss Army knife and a specialized tool. Sometimes you need that multi-purpose flexibility of an LSTM, but other times, a simpler statistical model like ARIMA might be more appropriate.
Could you give our listeners a concrete example of when to use each?
Sure, if you're dealing with simple, structured data with clear patterns like monthly sales data, ARIMA might be your best bet. But if you're working with complex data that has lots of hidden patterns and dependencies like language processing or complex weather patterns, that's where LSTMs really shine.
This has been incredibly insightful. Before we wrap up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember about LSTMs?
I'd say it's their adaptability. LSTMs are like those friends who are great at both short conversations and long-term relationships. They can handle both immediate patterns and long-term dependencies in data. But remember, they're not always the best tool for every job. It's about choosing the right approach for your specific needs.
Perfect. And that wraps up today's episode of Wave of the Day. Thank you all for listening. And thank you, Armin, for breaking down such a complex topic into digestible pieces. Until next time, keep riding the wave of innovation.